Joining me in the virtual studio is a gentleman I met a few years ago at the World of RC Triple Crown race. His name is Jose Zayas. And man, you have been with Team Losi for quite a long time. You and Mike Kendall are like knowing each other for years and
Yeah,
been on the Losi team. Welcome to the show, Jose. You've been uber busy with modern vintage and everything else that you're doing. But welcome, and maybe tell everybody out there a little bit of your background, where you come from, and how long you've been racing, and how you got into it, and whatnot.
yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me. It's exciting to not only be here chatting with you, of course, getting to know you a little bit better through the races and everything that you do for the industry. So, first and foremost, thank you for not only inviting me for everything you do for the community at large to keep everybody as informed as possible on all the great things that are out there for us to consider as racers or enthusiasts or hobbyists or even collectors, since we're talking about vintage. So, little bit of background. I think you know this. I've been racing for quite a long time. Got my first car, as I've heard many people here, in the mid '80s at Tamaya Blackfoot. That was my entry to the hobby in '86. Um, and then my first racing car was the Associated RC10T, although most people know me for Losi. My first car was a 10T in the early '90s. And since then, I've been a racer. I don't buy a lot of hobby grade things. I just like to race, and that's just what I've been doing. I was fortunate to start taking it quite seriously and got my first initial sponsors kind of in the mid '90s. And then after doing quite well in some races, I joined Team Losi in '96, I believe, is when it was, which was a long time ago, and was very fortunate to travel the country, represent them at the Worlds in '03 in Florida. And then, like many folks that you have on here, I actually quit racing in '04 when my daughter was born. Almost a decade, and came back in 2013. And I've been racing ever since. It was fortunate enough to get picked up by Losi, TLR, of course, now, and been doing it ever since. And I race a lot of modern cars, vintage cars, and of course, as you alluded to, have ventured into the business side of the industry. So it's been quite a journey, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Okay, so where did you grow up racing? Where was it Northeast, or did you? I know you're Puerto Rican. Did it
Yeah, I
start in
am.
Puerto Rico, then go to when you? Or I don't know. Let me know.
Gosh, super complicated. I'll make it simple. Of course, I am born and raised in Puerto Rico. Got my first RC car, the Blackfoot, in Honduras. I was fortunate to be part of a military family, so we traveled a lot. And then when I mentioned the Associate RC10T, that was in New Mexico, my first time in the States in the early '90s. And I was mostly a West Coast. So all of my, what I would call my real racing careers in the West Coast, out of New Mexico, raced a lot in California, went to graduate school in California. So I spent most of my time on the West Coast. In 2011, I came to the East Coast. I live in Virginia. And then I picked up racing again in 2013. And since then, I've been all on the East Coast.
Okay, so I was highly I thought you grew up in the Northeast racing
No,
community,
no,
but
West Coast guy.
that explains how you know Mike.
Yeah, yeah. Mike and I raced in California, as well as many of the folks that you've seen through the races, through the vintage era, the Matt Francis, Greg, all those guys were all West Coast side. And, yeah, the East Coast is a fairly new chapter for me, but one that I'm enjoying.
Okay, so you grew up racing against the fast. You grew up in the attitude era of RC, I say, and you raced. You named off some names there. Tell us what it was like racing in SoCal, New Mexico, back in the '90s.
Yeah, it was a very different environment back then. Not only a different perspective of where the hobby was, it was really a 2 manufacturer race. I mean, there were others. I don't wanna minimize any others. It was really the Associated Low Sierra, as we all know, especially here domestically. If you go overseas, you have Schumacher and others, but here domestically, it was the Losi Associated era, and, very fortunate to grow in that era. It was a very different market. Sponsorships were a little bit different to attain. Getting recognized required a lot of travel. There was no internet at scale, right, at that time. So we were We really had to be present. We really had to deliver results. We really had to advocate for ourselves at the track, not only in presence, how we act, but also on the track, how we get results. Um, and as you alluded to, I got to race with many of the what I would call the legends, as we've called them recently. Matt and I raced a lot. I was in Northern California, and we were everything from off the track to on the track. Still remained good friends, and of course, Greg and Brian at the time, Travis Amescua, a lot of those folks. They were driving more and traveling more, but I joined them. I would say a decent amount, maybe once a month. I was in the circuit running with many of them, and very fortunate to learn a lot from them and try to get faster. And you mentioned earlier you like gas truck, Adam Drake and others. So it was a really fun time. Most of my time was with Losi, if not all. And that was really created, I think, who I am as a racer today. And many of those lessons that I learned and experiences that I experienced are things that I'm continuing to practice today.
That's pretty cool. You said 2 names there that I want to talk to, Matt Francis, and I wanna get Amescua on here as well. Tell us about the Worlds in 2003, when you went to represent, Losi. Well, that must have been exciting.
It was exciting. It was in Florida in Minreg, probably my favorite outdoor track. It's no longer there, but it was an amazing facility. It was an amazing experience. I only got to attend one World, and that was the '03. Um, and just a lot of learning, a lot of great experience, a lot of camaraderie. It's a long event, as you've captured here in many of your podcasts. It's a grind, controlled tires. You've talked about all these things, so it was a lot of learning. I would say unfortunate for Losi. If you look at the results, that was not a good race for Losi in general. We showed up with a brand new car that none of us had access to, the Team Losi Triple X BK2. So we really got parts there literally as we got to our pits and had to completely unbuild our cars and build a new car. So that was not expected, but we did it. We all did it, and we had to learn a lot. That doesn't happen as often today at these races, but and so forth. So it was a heck of an experience. I didn't get the results that I wanted to at 30 something. I think I need to go back. But God, I wouldn't trade it for anything. We're watching the World Cup right now, just representing your country and being able to meet people from across the world and compete and see where you stack. I wouldn't trade that for anything. It was amazing.
I agree with you there. I think most people should treat a world championship as an experience. Obviously, you want to do well, but it's a great experience. You get to collaborate and meet people from around the world that have the same passion for the sport as you do. And I think if you are a avid RC racer, it's one of those. If you can attend one, whether whatever discipline that you are racing, you should. So
Yeah, and if you don't mind me adding, I mean, I think that it also embodies the perspective of team. We were there as a team, and, kind of after my first 2 qualifiers, I think I broken one, if I remember correctly, it was a little while ago, and at some point, listen, it wasn't like I was in contention to win it or even make the main, but I wanted to do good, as you alluded to. But at one point, especially having a new car, I recognized that my job was to test as much as I can for those that were in the main. If it is in a spring change, if it is in an oil or a piston or whatever tires are controlled for the most part, except for the fronts and two wheel. Um, so we all had to shift our roles real time and do whatever we can to maximize the outcome for the team. Unfortunately, Losi did not win that one. Billy Easton won that. He drove incredibly well. But again, that's just an example of we talked about it, what it is to be part of a team and to be at an event like the Worlds and be part of the experience and do whatever you can to help the team do as best as they can.
so back in this time, was you part of the traveling? I call it the traveling circus. That is RC.
Yeah.
Was you do it? Was you hitting that RC circuit hard back then?
I was. I mean, again, not as hard as Brian and Matt, who were just somewhere every week. I was, in '03, I'm done with grad school. I am traveling for sure. I'm on a plane probably twice a month for a race. I was primarily known for gas truck back then, so I was definitely hitting the Dirt Nitro Challenge and going to Hemet and going to Silver State and things of that nature. And electric was something that I raced quite a bit as well, but I really enjoyed the gas truck side of things. So we all kind of had our roles that we were kind of focusing on to support in whatever way we can the company or the company.
Okay, so you are a gas truck guy. I didn't realize that. That
Yeah,
would
yeah.
be why you're kicking everybody's ass at ONS in gas truck.
ONS2 wasn't very good. I broke, but then that's a different conversation.
Who won that? I didn't even remember who was it. Ben?
I I forgot the name. No, it wasn't Ben. It was a different individual. Both I broke early. I think I was leading. Don't quote me on that. First or second. Caught a pipe, and then Mike was battling for Kendall, and he ended up breaking a something inside their diff or the outdrive. I think what happened on him. So it was a we both qualified well, and unfortunately ended early. It happens. But I'm going to ONS3, so that I'm telling you right now, so I'm excited.
Well, I know I'm not gonna beat you, so unless you break, so I'm not worried about. But I was admiring your triple XNT. It had a phantom motor. It's like OG phantom
It
motor
is
in it.
the original motor I retired with.
All right, so you kind of were in the last legs of the gas truck era. I think 2005, and kind of
Mhm.
2004. I went to my first big race, and they still had gas truck. 2005, they did, and then eventually started to die off after that. And you said you finished up racing what year when your daughter
Oh
was born?
04. Oh 04 is when my daughter was born, so shortly after she was born, I kinda quit in earnest. Different chapter, different responsibilities, and yeah.
You and I kinda I don't know, I guess we're about the same age, you might be a little bit older, I'm not sure, but we kinda came up in the same era of RC with, the type of people obviously, I was more 8 scale based, but I was reading about all these guys in the magazines as well back in the day, so it was a lot of fun. And here I thought you root raced in the Northeast and Puerto Rico. Boy, was I wrong.
No, although, little factoid, you could find it, Matt and I, right after the Worlds, we flew to Puerto Rico to do, like, an expo race, and that was, an incredible, humbling, and cultural thing for me to share with Matt and for us to hang out there. That was a lot of fun. That was one of my last races, kinda racing, and that was a neat time.
How was that? That was like what? Oh, in
Well, right after the Worlds were in '03, I think we went there that summer, so it would have been still in '03. Yeah, they hosted us, it was a lot of fun to be able to engage with the locals and spend, kinda afternoon hour times and at the same time race during the day, and that was a lot of fun.
When I first started in the JQ Racing as their manager, there was a big 1/8 scale RC community in Puerto Rico. This is 2017, 2018,
Mhm.
and at that time, they had about 4 tracks, and they had about 75 racers, which may not seem like a lot,
It
but
is.
it's quite a lot, and the hurricanes, man, the hurricanes that came, they took away those tracks, and they have 1 track now, and then there's 2 guys that have a track. One, I think is Valdemir, and then Carlos. So Carlos has an AstroTurf track up in the mountains, and I'm probably saying his name wrong. He has an indoor carpet track, and a lot of those Puerto Rican guys come up and race the carpet championships every year. It's a
Yep.
big contingent of Puerto Ricans.
Yeah,
So
especially the Florida races, right? I mean, there is an outdoor track, that has been resurfaced in the east part of the island, um,
Fajardo,
in Fajardo, yep, and then there is a beautiful asphalt on-road track, in the north central part of the island that's really quite gorgeous as well.
yeah, Puerto Rico has a decent history of RC, like a lot of. I know it's an American country, but we consider it like a lot of Latin American countries. They have a very steep history in RC. I've traveled through South America, and fun fact, I was talking to his name's coming up. Renato, you have Renato Tridardi Senior, Renato Tridardi Junior, and Donato Tridardi. So I was talking to Renato, who's very good. He's an 8 scale driver, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm from they're from Venezuela." And like, yeah, I did the back in the day, the South American championships was big. There's some fast guys, and he was naming off some of the guys that he was talking about that he beat, and I was like, "Okay, no wonder you're so good because those guys are really good." I've seen some talented drivers coming out of Latin America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just don't get the exposure. All right, so '04, daughter's born, you take a 10-year hiatus from RC. What brought you back, and was you surprised when you came back and saw how different things were, or were things different from when you left?
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, 13, I now have a daughter and have a son. I felt that he would enjoy it, like most dads, maybe when they wanna do it with their child, whatever. I knew my daughter didn't wanna do it, so, yeah, so I we got a few cars. At the time, I called, Todd Hodge at Losi and said, "Hey, what tell me a little bit about what's going on with the more modern cars," whatever. So, anyway, got back together, and like you said, it was daunting at how much it had changed. Not only had changed the vehicles, they were already trending. There was the beginnings of mid motors and things of that nature. Going to the slick tires. A lot of people don't know this, but back in the day, we were still dealing with a little bit of tire compound, some saucing, but very little scale compared to how it was today. So tires, vehicles, fundamentally different. There was a lot more. It wasn't the Losi associated. I kind of knew that. I tracked that, but you had this enterprise of companies that had blossomed up, especially in the A scale side. You've hit on this many times, how many companies there are out there competing for the same number of people, right? The economics are really quite interesting there. But the most stark difference for me was sponsorships. I mean, I think that was one thing that not seeing the transition over that decade, I can understand. I think I could say I can understand the dynamics of what caused that transition and how folks viewed companies viewed sponsorship, how individuals approach the concept of sponsorship, the magnitude of sponsor drivers at now 4 scales. Back then there wasn't that many different scales of different percentages and different whatever. So I think that was the most stark um, difference for me, and I still struggle with it. But I think that was for sure um, quite a bit of, I don't wanna say a surprise, but it caught me a little bit off guard. But the vehicles, of course, have gotten better, have gotten stronger. We're pushing these vehicles in ways that we weren't pushing them before because of rubber or because of track conditions or whatever. I think the last thing I would say, I and we'll talk about it in vintage, I hope, is that there's also was the beginnings of the consolidation towards the grooves, some beginnings of glued surface tracks for the 10 scale side where we had a lot more diversity in track conditions, back in the day in 10 scale. Um, just like you see in 8 scale, you see some diversity, right? You have the dirt, you have the silver state, and then of course the world championship in Europe that was almost a glued surface or oil surface. I don't know what they put down, but so very different, diverse conditions, which create challenges. I think that's a healthy thing. But so those were the things that caught me the most surprised, but I would argue if there's one thing, it's the approach by companies and the approach by racers to sponsorship.
I would have to agree with you on that. I think around that era time, 2000s, 2004 forward, I would say even further than that, man, because I noticed the first sponsor thing around 2008. I knew it existed, but I remember when I first got my first sponsorship, and I was like, "Okay," I didn't even know nothing about the company. I knew the guy, and I was like, "Oh, I want these cars." Didn't work out too good, but yes, the sponsor culture, I have been on both sides of the fence. I've been giving out sponsorships like candy. I've also now sat back and saw where I kinda made a mistake there as well, and people were trying to tell me back then, but I just saw quantity over quality, and unfortunately, this is now the business model for a lot of these companies. Some are trying to reel it back in, but it's hard. It's hard because it's hard.
This is very difficult, and but I think the challenge also that has been created is, you have this minimal loyalty now, right? Is who can give me the most sponsorship. So the loyalty side, the brand ambassador side, the enthusiasm to represent somebody has been devalued, and I think that's dangerous. For the industry, it could really lead to some really bad outcomes that I think if we're not careful, um, et cetera. I mean, there's things to consider. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was in New Mexico, New Mexico is just for fun facts. It's the seventh largest state in the US, but it has like 47% of populations, little population, right? Before I became sponsored, I remember the manager at the time, Richard Trujillo, said, "Hey, you gotta travel. You gotta be seen. It's not like what you can do locally is what you can do at a regional, at a national level." And to be honest with you, Keenan, I probably took 10 flights on my own dime at my own risk to even get to know these people, yet get the results and thousands of dollars. And when I became sponsor, I was the only one in the entire state, to be sponsored by Losi. So, you know, um, if I and I think that it's very different now. I think right now people just send resumes. I see even companies asking for resumes, which, oh my god, if I imagine back in the day, Losi having to ask for resumes, right? Or whoever it is, right? So it's a different thing. I as a business person, as a racer, I don't think it's a healthy trend, but I understand why it's being done. I think that it's dangerous, slippery slope for sure.
I 100% agree with you. I know there's a lot of people out there that will be like, I need I that rely on the sponsorships. You do get that loyalty from people, but I would just like to see some regulation, right? Come together as a group and say, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Because you got people that jump for the better deal. And I think people have to be more realistic about their abilities and what to expect from RC racing because it's hard. And it's a very slippery slope. I don't know how we have to reel it in somehow a little bit. I'm not saying it's gonna go away, but we need to put some regulation on it to keep, because it's not just people will say, well, I'm just a contract customer. Yes and no.
Yeah, but it's also I think you hit on everything. I think the other thing that I would add to that is that I don't think these individuals truly appreciate what it means to be sponsored and what are your responsibilities to be sponsored, right? We talked about it even before we talked on this topic, right? Back then, they were looking at our not only our performance, our behavior at the track, how we were accessible for individuals to come to privateers to come to and ask questions, how we were representing the brand. And this is before social media, right? It's more complicated now. Don't get me wrong, but there it was a 1 through N, evaluation of you as a character, you as a racer, you as an individual. So I think that, that doesn't mean that we had folks not yelling on the driver saying it race. It happens. It's an emotional element. You're competing, don't get me wrong. But, um, I just think it's too easy, and these individuals don't know what it means to be a representative in earnest. And I don't wanna people to look at this and goes, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's saying." Is at the what I mean by that, I think people should feel not only proud, but honored to be sponsored, and the discount is just a dividend from you becoming sponsored, not the reason why you become sponsored. So it's just I think the model's flipped. I digress.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I like how you put it on the end. I definitely agree with you. Okay. So, and another thing I wanted to say was about the travel stuff. I have heard people say to me, "Oh, I say if you want to get noticed, you got to travel." Oh, well, I need a travel budget. I was like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You got to go out there and earn that, right? And it
Can you
costs.
imagine any other industry lefty, like, if you wanna be a motocross driver, says, "I'll travel as long as you pay for me, and you don't know me." I mean, it's just ludicrous, right, some of these requests. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I 100% agree with you because I've heard a lot of them. All right. So you're back into RC. You've been doing it steady since for all these years now. When I met you at World of RC, we was talking Spanish, so we got
Yeah, yeah.
along right away. I obviously my Spanish is nowhere near as good as yours, but we got to talk the Spanish, and you were showing me at that time. I think it was a tire scuffer that you had, or a
Yeah,
wheel
yeah,
scuffer.
that's right, that's right.
You was like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then fast forward a couple years ago, and you got all this other stuff going for us. So let's get into the vintage side of things because that's what you're here for. let's talk about how modern vintage came about, the vintage craze right now, and whatever you want to talk about because I'm learning from you right now.
Well, listen, again, I appreciate even the subject and the ability to talk about it. So as we alluded to, I was racing modern cars and having a blast and doing, some traveling. That's how we met at the World of RC. It was all modern cars. A couple years ago, before the craze, there was an event at our what I would call my most local facility, which is the track in Maryland. Hosted one of the nationals, and it was their first foray into vintage racing. And Dirk Anderson from Old School RC was putting on the event, and I got to meet Dirk at the time. And I did not have a vintage racer, so I kind of little did like many folks a couple years ago, which is just go on eBay and try to piecemeal something. And I got a Team Losi Double X, which was my first vehicle, which is a little bit of a really cool irony that I started with Team Losi with. So I found one and quickly found out how difficult it was to get parts or how difficult it was to really modernize it, air quotes, right? How do you run a lipo battery inside of a tub chassis, or how do you do this and that and the other? So I got a car and I was fortunate to win that race. And then the bug at scale occurred. I launched I did not launch. So I'm an engineer by training, and I share that because I was doing some parts for the car that you couldn't find anymore, and that's was the basis for my original company, which is still there, and I enjoy Z3D, which in essence was my attempt to help the community. Again, this is before all this growth, be able to run their cars again. I mean, that was really it. It was very difficult to get some parts or very costly, etcetera. Plus, I wanted to modernize and, like, help folks put modern wheels on their vintage cars and things of that nature. So that's how Z3D was born, and, that's been, a lot of fun. It went from my first product, which was a fan mount, to I think over 60 products now from kind of battery trays to hex converters to some tools you alluded to scuff your wheels so you can help your A scales to different parts. Oh, how to run big bore springs on old school shocks, things of that nature. So then I attended rather the event and I sponsored the event, which was the Vintage Clash in Indiana at Hoosier. That was a big event. Of course, we did not plan for it. Unfortunately, we lost Brian Dunbar, just weeks prior to it. I knew Brian. I got to race with Brian. We had talked about the race. We were excited to reconnect at that race. And unfortunately, we were not able to. But, like anything, I got to reconnect with a lot of my old friends that were there. And to see them back, Matt hadn't raced in a long time. Greg hadn't raced in a long time, and that what it brought was a reunion per se. So that was a lot of fun. And then I met Dan McDade, who is the owner of DragonPunch RC, and we just kind of hit it off. And we kind of just started connecting. We started working on a few things together under his brand. I was designing some things for his brand. And anyway, I don't wanna just make this too long, and then eventually we respected what our approach was, our capabilities. He has an incredibly strong capability and expertise in material science, carbon fiber, alloys. I have a lot of expertise, I would argue, in designing and racing and understanding, what these cars need to survive. So we launched, Modern Vintage last December, and we just celebrated 6 months. So it's been, and of course, Modern Vintage, sorry, is, for those that don't know, it was really intended to be a company that, in essence, took existing vehicles, respected the original vehicles, and created a platform for people to race more competitively these great vehicles from the 90s.
Okay, so let's digress. Tell me a little bit. Right now, we're looking at some of your designs here on your Modern Vintage Facebook page, or you can see Dragon Punch, and then you have your logos here. I don't know much about this Dragon Punch. I just see a lot of his stuff, man. You have a lot of stuff here too.
Yeah, and those are just the parts that one could put on your existing Losi double X or double XT. What we wanted to do, let me respect your question. So Dragon Punch was an existing company and Z3D was an existing company. Two different companies. I would simplify. Dan would probably add to this, which is fine. Dragon Punch has a very respected um, community that he's done a lot of things on the associated vehicles, some things for the low-C vehicles, a lot of great work in carbon fiber, a lot of great work in alloys, aluminum, titanium, etcetera. Um, I, of course, was doing things on the more plastic side of things, and together, we came together to do Modern Vintage. So Modern Vintage is co-owned by Dan and I, and the original product was an upgrade for the Team Losi Double X. The screen shares that you were showing in a minute is we wanted to do it in such a way that we not only build our own conversion for the car, but for those people that wanted to run their original cars, many of the parts that go on the double X squared, which is what we called it, and many of the parts that go on the double XT squared can fit your original double X and your original double XT, not only as a fit product, but also a product that makes it stronger or race worthy for today's environments.
I see you guys have like aluminum diffs and idlers. Now, will these fit in my triple XNT or just the XXT?
So those are really
These are
excited we
composite.
just
Yeah.
launched those. Those are not aluminum. They are, machined here in the US, Delrin, and they are not. They're for the double X or the double XT.
Oh, come on, Jose.
That doesn't
These
mean we
ones are
won't be
CNC
now
though.
working on other stuff. But yeah, the triple XNT had what's called a monster diff, so it's a bigger diff, but
Mhm.
geometrically, it's the same approach. So if there's a need, that's something that we could certainly, look at for the triple XNT.
Okay, and how long has Dragon Punch been doing this? Because he seems to have a lot of product.
He does, he does. I believe, don't quote me on this, I think they're pushing 3 years, since they've been doing this, and Z3D about a year and a half, and of course, Modern Vintage 6 months.
Okay, so I see your stuff is more focused on the low-C stuff. Now, we've had this discussion. I've asked you
Yeah,
before. I don't know if you could touch on it, but I when I was at ONS, it was very cool to see everybody geeking out on the old school stuff. And I'm not gonna lie, I had an absolute blast racing outdoor 10 scale. I like 10 scale. I was just racing gas truck. It was a lot of fun. It was hot that weekend. It was so hot we was trying to stop that track from grooving up.
yeah.
It was crazy. But what stood out to me, the vintage stuff is cool. I see that. I think it's memorable. I like it. I saw it in the magazines. But honestly, what really impressed me the most, and it's not unfortunately, it's not your product. It is Dragon Punch's product was the Yoko, how that looked like I think the modern vintage conversion for the Yokomo that people were running. Chris Venner had one. And then obviously what Associated has done with the RC10, the FTE. So that if I was to get into vintage, that would be my way. I like the modern stuff. I like the older looking stuff, that vintage, but I want modern stuff. I want big bore shocks. I want hexes. I want the ease of that type of stuff. So that's my take on it. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I think for this to go forward, people probably wouldn't be racing low C cars as much as they are if it wasn't for people like you and Dragon Punch.
No, a couple things, and, the one that Chris Van Air is running is a Rubrix car,
Oh, I'm
but it's
sorry.
the
I'm
same
sorry.
thing. No, it's perfectly fine. I just wanna correct, that piece, and I think you're right. I mean, I think the community is maybe trifurcated, which is a complicated word, but divided is probably easier, in 3 ways. It certainly is, right? I mean, you have the folks that really wanna run the cars as they were back in the day.
Mhm.
Um, then you have the folks that are coming into it now, embracing what is happening, and they wanna just buy a kit like the one that Associated just released, and because it makes it easier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It has components that they're used to, big bore shocks, et cetera. And then there's companies like us that are, I think, kind of in that middle ground where we want to in essence, if you have a platform in your garage or in your attic and you've always wanted to run it, or you have it and you're super nervous to run it because if you break, then you're weaken a shot early or whatever it may be, I want to provide you with the opportunity to relive that moment, if you wanted to do that and so forth, and do that in a modern way. So it's kinda like a bridge, to that. And I think that that's really what we think. We have been focusing on the 2 Losi cars. I would say that's we've only 6 months in, so that don't tattoo us just as the Losi guys, even though my shirt is Losi. I bleed Losi, but, and TLR. But, that doesn't mean we do have products for associated cars on both sides, DragonPunch, Modern Vintage, and of course, Z3D. So we embrace the vintage community at large, but our first 2 platforms are, of course, the Losi cars. So the community is divided, right, for sure.
I do apologize to the vintage community and to you guys for getting that confused. Rubrics and Dragon Punch. I am not familiar with everything.
It's
I
okay.
do apologize. So, uh, you guys are basically making replacement parts, but stronger. Are you making performance parts as well?
Yeah. Yeah, so think about let me try to explain this as easy. So, modern vintage started by making a conversion kit for the Team Losi Double X. That's what we call the Double X squared, and it is a full conversion. It does require a donor car or parts of a car to make it happen. And what we did, which is really important to who we are, is we wanted to, in essence, geometrically be identical to the car. We didn't wanna make geometric changes that in essence so these are just parts that are available for the triple XT, right? So through the Facebook page, you may see like the double X squared or the double XT squared through the images. I think you'll find some in a little bit as you scroll through it. But so in essence, we wanted to create a conversion kit. And that were identical in all the geometric perspectives. So that's how modern vintage was born. And we wanted to allow the racer to make choices along of what you said. So for example, here is, my double X squared. The first thing that you notice that it doesn't have a tub chassis. It is a flat carbon chassis, but it is geometrically identical. Every single hole is originally where it was, right? I tend to like, just because maybe my age, the original shocks. But we made the car so you can actually put big bores without any other parts. You don't have to buy anything else. You can put big bores on it. Um, and it's not that easy just replacing the shocks because the shock tower can be lowered. So you can put big bore shocks because big bore shocks are actually shorter than a traditional old school shock. So the kit allows you to do all these things. Plus, it allows you to easily change your battery weight distribution. It has hex conversion so you can run modern wheels. It has upgraded hubs, aluminum like the ones you see more commonly today. So, like alluded to earlier, it is really a hybrid approach that we have taken as a company. And again, we focus on both the Team Losi Double X buggy and the Team Losi Double XT truck as our
Okay.
initial foray.
Now, how long have you been planning modern vintage before you launched it?
So, we in essence began drawing I began drawing things probably in the September timeframe, super fast, and we launched our original vehicles in December, so 3 months really from design. We did a lot of testing, we were flying to different places, manufacturing, sourcing, and by the way, I mean, I something that we're proud of, that a lot of people don't do, that's not a criticism. Every single thing on our cars should be very careful. I'll explain that. Is made in the US, 100% sourced in the US. We couldn't get screws and a few other things, but everything is designed, tested, and manufactured in the US.
That's cool. Very cool.
Right.
Very cool. Do you find it more difficult to do things, source stuff here in the USA?
Undoubtedly, especially on the cost side of things, we do have a higher labor stack than other countries, so intrinsically, we're going to have pay a premium for that labor. I do think, you counteract that by shipping, tariffs, the time that it takes, to really go across any one of the ponds to have conversations or so forth. So It's just something that Dan and I thought was super important for our brand. And it is harder, but we're very proud of it. And yeah, what you were just showing there a second ago, we then our European folks have not only approved it, but Motorsport is now distributing our cars in the UK. We're pretty proud of that.
I do. I was looking at the pictures. That's a beautiful picture, by the way, of your car.
ONS.
Uh, yeah. And then do you do different colors? Like I see you have silver carbon fiber here as
Yeah,
well.
so again, we're kinda just boys in adult bodies, Dan and I, so when we launch every car, we have what's the Founders Edition, which is a play on Tesla, and the first 25 kits coming out one time only, never to be done again, silver, carbon, which is what you see there. So that's the example of the original car and our car, you can see the differences there, right? And after the 25 Founders Edition, we just replaced the silver carbon with black carbon, and everything else is the same.
Man, these are nice kits. Very nice.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes. What were some of the biggest challenges designing this stuff and getting it to market?
I think the biggest challenge, well, we made some decisions early, right? So 2 decisions that we made early is that no matter what we come up with from an idea, it has to, in essence, honor the geometric decisions that were made back in the day. So everything is in the exact location that they were originally done in the 90s. So a lot of precision measurements and ensuring and, trying to rationalize the why. Many of these cars had, um, challenges where they would break as an example, right? So looking at those vulnerabilities and trying to decide how do we address them. In the original double X, there were several vulnerabilities, in the rear end and the front end. So we wanted to address those at the same time. And then the third leg of the stool is how do we then make it easier for people to race it? Again, that was the conversation we had on big bore shocks, on modern wheels, lipos, etc. So those were the three governing principles that we had to design a car. And I think with the combination of Dan's knowledge in material science and my knowledge in designing and as a racer, what I think works and doesn't work as a racer, or what are the kinds of things that we need to consider, because all tracks are different, big jumps, little jumps, outdoor, looster, running these cars on slicks, etc. So we try to do our best. And then the last thing is we have a few folks that help us out for testing. Mike Kendall, you mentioned earlier, Chris Hackinson, as well helps us out, and Frank Denny help us out in testing. So we send them so we can, in essence, grow the pie of the conditions that we test in. So it's been a lot of fun.
Now, you're making these chassis and all this type of stuff. Do you guys have the ability to make like replacement arms and stuff for these vehicles? Because I would assume that getting those type of parts is becoming very hard to get.
They are. So at the moment right now, we're not doing arms. I know there's great companies in the UK. JC Racing, for example, has launched a few arms. So we're looking at what others are doing. We don't want to flood the market. We want to embrace other companies as a community, right? So if JC Racing is doing something, it may not make sense for us to do it, as an example. In some cases, it might make sense because we're in 2 different markets and the parts are so inexpensive, but you really get stuck with a high shipping cost or tariffs. So we wanna make sure that we take all that into account, right, as we kind of work on this, and be as a good steward or a good partner as we can with what the others are trying to do. So that's kind of that balance that we're doing, but certainly we arms are becoming challenging. Gears are the ones that we felt were the best challenge, and that's why we just launched the gears just last week.
Now, is it easier? Are you CNCing the gears with the Delrin as well?
Am
Or
I
are
what?
the gears mode like the Delrin gears, are they CNC cut?
Yeah, they are fully CNC cut. We did probably 8 versions of that simple gear that people see because, you know, how good the diff ball sits in the diff gear, and there's a lot of different things that one has to consider, right? So super happy. We found this great individual and shop. And yeah, this is our first foray into gear, so that's exciting too.
And then, of course, you offer them you know what you need to make? Here's what you need to
Yeah.
make. You need to make MST1, Mugen MST1 eye luggers.
We're open. I mean, I say that because a lot of people, reach out to me and say, "Hey, I have this unique vehicle that there may not be a big of a market to do and so forth." If there's enough of a market, we will certainly consider it. Lefty, like I said, we're not just a Losi brand, etc. At the ONS, which is exciting that they brought up gas truck. We'll see how gas truck continues to hopefully grow with what Associate is doing and others, but we're not opposed to doing it. Now that we really feel comfortable machining gears, and we learned a lot of lessons and we have a process that we trust. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's not impossible or difficult rather to venture into that world. We just want to make sure that if we do it, there is at least an interest out there because we don't want to sit. We're very small. We don't want to sit on a lot of inventory if we don't have to. It doesn't help anybody. Um, and that's what we're trying to do.
How fast can you design something and have it available for testing?
It depends on what it is, right? So if it's something what's really neat about what we do is most of the time we can design something and if we're doing a 3D printed to test fit, we can do something and literally depending on the part in hours. I have designed things in hours. I'll be quite honest with you. And then transferring that to an alloy design and design choices and things of that nature and setting up the CNC. We can in a week, I mean, we can do it. I mean, it's pretty quick. We and Dan and I have a process that's really, really healthy, and allows us to do things that others can't. Carbon, if we have the carbon in stock, again, assuming machine availability it can be pretty quick. So given that we're just 2 individuals and we're pretty flexible, it can be pretty quick. Gears could be a little bit more complicated just because you wanna make sure you get the right pitch, you wanna make sure that you get the right shape of the tooth, and a lot of people just think of gears as the rotating element, which is important, but the pitch is important because of acoustics. You don't want it to have a really loud gearbox. And you want to make sure that you have the right tolerances, you have the right spacing between the teeth. And so that requires a little bit of more testing and fitting and things of that nature. Like I said, I believe we did we might have done 8 different gears of the diff gears that you saw before we were happy with them. So
Okay. Now that you bring up the JC guy, is he doing 3D printed parts or is he doing like machine Delrin parts for people as
I think
well?
he does a combination of machining, of course, the alloys. He does a lot of molded, so he does molds to do it. I believe he may have a few parts that are 3D printed. So I think he may be exercising all 3 manufacturing methods. But I would say the bulk of it is your traditional machining, uh, or your, quite expensive molding process, and he does a great job.
Which is a great segue because I always say molds cost a lot of money. Maybe you can put it into a dollar value for people out there that how much that plastic part actually really costs to make.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the complexities of the mold, right? Every mold's not created equal, but a mold could run you and also depends, Lefty, that people don't understand, the material that you use for the mold is governed by how many products you think you're going to make, right? Because the mold degrades over time. The more you use it through either thermal cycling or doing other kinds of things, the mold will degrade. So the mold has a life of itself. And you make choices on what kind of mold you're going to make based on how many you think you're going to make. For example, if you're going to make a ball cup, right? The mold for that, you're gonna make hundreds of thousands of parts, right? So it's a different approach that if you were gonna make, let's say, a chassis where it may be 1,000 parts or 2,000 parts. So there's a lot of trade-offs that have to be considered. That being said, you're thousands of dollars in, simplistically saying, on making a mold for a bumper. Now, but bumper is maybe an exaggeration, but a chassis and things of that nature, right? So you have to have enough visibility into what you think the market is, what the market uptake would be, and then how many you want to make, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, for even the companies today in the modern world, these choices are very, very real. You can think about the number of molded parts that are in a modern car. It's incredible, right?
So yes. So when we were doing JQ racing, I would remember, like, we would do a lot of aluminum parts, and then I learned that, yes, they are stronger, but they're cheaper than making a mold to fix a little a tweak. And you said something about molds getting, uh, worn out. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna say the name of the company, but I had a few people in the 8 skill world reach out to me saying, "Man, these guys gotta change their molds. The diff gearbox is getting so bad that we have to put 15 shims on one side and this shim on
Yeah.
the other side." So, it's a lot to think of. And then, of course, if you're dealing with overseas in Asia, it's not as simple as that because you have to find a I've seen it through the JQ Racing side of things, and then I see my buddy Alan, who's doing Power Wheels on a bigger scale. He was able to develop and produce his own Power Wheels in a year, right? From 3D printing and from
Mhm.
sketch to printing and whatnot, and to molds, which was my next question. How has 3D printing helped you, people like you, DragonPunch, and all the other vintage cars? Not just you, because everybody's doing it, but the ability to 3D print and have a piece, a product that you design within a few hours.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize, and a lot of people, this is a really fun conversation and an interesting one because 3D printing is not created equal, right? You have your hobby grade printers that you can buy on Amazon, that definitely have a function either from learning what a 3D printer can do, maybe entering things of that nature. But what people don't recognize is these printers, especially the more inexpensive ones, there's only a small set of materials that they can process, that they can print with, right? All the way to industrial printers that have, in essence, unlimited number of products that, or materials that they can work on. So that's an important distinction because, as you said, a lot of people have 3D printers, and you're absolutely right. But some of your more inexpensive printers, which have more inexpensive material, the material may not be the right one for RC because it's susceptible to temperature or it's a very brittle material and things of that nature, right? That all being said, I use 3D printing for a variety of different reasons. Z3D is, I would say, heavily 3D printed parts. And again, it was done and it is done for parts that are not available that I believe can perform and be 3D printed. We use a range of standard materials all the way to carbon infused materials. And for those materials, you need really expensive printers because it's a really hard material to process. Okay. Um, the modern vintage cars that I mentioned earlier have some 3D printed parts. There's 4 different materials that are used for our car, because materials need to perform differently in different locations, right? That's number 1. But we also, when we first did it, we actually printed the entire car. So it wasn't to race it, but it was to make sure that everything fit correctly and everything kind of looked correctly and everything kind of, we had to think about how the people put it together, assemble it, and things of that nature. So 3D printing allows you to do things not only quickly, but it gives you that three-dimensional visual representation outside of your monitor so you can feel it because it may look cool, but then putting it together, as you know, from the time that you've been in the hobby, it's incredibly difficult or awkward or funky and parts are flying everywhere. So we have to think about all those pieces, and I think 3D printing certainly has a role to play there for us. So that's how we've been doing it. Also for prototyping. So if we go to at ONS, we were testing a few things. I will print a few things. We know that the end game may be an aluminum piece or it may be something else, but it allows us to do this rapid testing of things that we think could be valuable for the sector.
Dude, and to do that back in the day was so
Impossible.
much work.
Impossible.
Impossible. Look, I was talking there. So on my other channel, my Power Wheels channel, I had a guy, and dude, they're doing whole gearboxes for
Oh yeah.
Power Wheel and wheels, like big giant with, and he has a
Oh,
honeycomb shape in it, so it's like got more grip. And then I was talking to one gentleman who's been doing in the RC world. He They were doing the Infinity electric, a Nitro to electric buggy conversion, and he had 3D printed aluminum motor mounts and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It is, and you are correct. So the guy that was doing the Power Wheel stuff, he showed me a setup. He's got 6, not big machines, but 6 quality. This is what he does.
Mhm.
6 quality machines going 24/7 built, but he's also doing big projects as well. I think that 3D printing has brought tinkering back to RC, hobbyists back to RC. And I have crawlers. I have a 10 scale, my 10 scale crawlers, my mini crawlers. Now the rails and all that stuff are carbon fiber, links and all that stuff are metal. But all the plastic parts, the skid plate and all that stuff, all 3D printed, holding up strong, and the ability to make changes quickly is incredible.
Absolutely.
Incredible. 3D printing is amazing.
I think it's really changed the way that we design, test, develop, maybe design, develop, test, and eventually ultimately make a decision of what the end product is. Changed the game, right? Because every form of manufacturing before was subtractive, right? So you think about what 3D printing is really additive manufacturing instead of subtractive, right? Subtractive, you start with a big block of metal and you start taking the metal away, right? So it's really changed the game not only in what you can do. I also created. There's a part that was a lot of fun to design. It's kind of similar to the J Concepts motor pinion caddy. And so you've probably seen it. You can put motor pinions, but I wanted to figure out a way to put more motor pinions inside of it. And I have underground tunnels so you can put your set screws, as an example. That would be incredibly difficult to nearly impossible to do out of an alloy, as an example, right? So there's other things that you can really get really creative, that would be either cost prohibitive to impossible to do in traditional manufacturing as well. So it's definitely really interesting.
How far do you think we are away from building a 3D printed car that can be raced successfully? If when I mean successfully, has the same, if not better, endurance as what we're getting on a molded plastic, or can at least keep up to the molded plastic strength. And basically, what I'm trying to say is how far away are we from having complete raceable 3D printed cars?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And the reason why it's a tough question is I don't know if you would do a complete car by choice. And what I mean by that is, could we design a chassis that's made from a high performing 3D printed material and design, to compete with, say a B7 or a TLR 22X alloy chassis? Could we do it? I think the answer is undoubtedly yes, but it may be heavier. It may be other things because you have to strengthen it in places because you have, the performance of the alloy has certain characteristics, strength characteristics, bending characteristics, and so forth. And that is all taken into the account. So if you want this car to have the same flex, and if you want the car to have the same strength, um, could you do it? Yes. It might be heavier. There'll be other challenges that are born with it, right? It's the same way if you were going to do an aluminum. Think about the aluminum tub chassis of an Associated, right? It has wings so it doesn't collapse, right? Because if not, if it was a flat piece of aluminum, it would just bend like a taco. Carbon fiber allowed you to not do that, right? Because you have fibers running in that direction, it'll give you strength in that direction, right? So there's an example that you designed it differently with an alloy that you would with a composite. And the same, thinking would happen to a 3D printed part, right? So I think to answer your question elegantly, could we do it today? Yes, it would for sure look different. It would for sure have some penalty, heavier or whatever it may be. So I think you're going to see 3D printed parts or additive manufacturing parts because you could do it from powder resins and not just a printer. More used in the system that you have seen before. The other thing, though, left to consider is when you're doing things at the scale of Associated or TLR or Schumacher and others, I don't think they're going to invest in a lot of heavy printers. You're going to go to the mold side because you can just pump, through the mold. These products come out like in whatever, say 5 seconds for a ball cup. I'm just picking a number, right? But if you are going to 3D print it, that same ball cup, let's say you couldn't, but let's say you could, may take you 40 minutes. So there's that time component too. So the amount of product that you're going to make also will drive the decision of what you're going to do.
Okay. So 3D printing as it is now is probably, like you said, just good for prototype parts and testing out things to see if they work without having to mold them up and making before they do. So it's I don't
Or smaller volume parts, right?
yes,
Or yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yes. Okay, cool. Well, let's get into some more
Yeah.
vintage.
Techno RC. Techno RC is a championship winning manufacturer of high performance A scale, 10 scale, Nitro, and electric RC buggies and trucks. With a worldwide dealer network, USA and Europe based headquarters, comprehensive warranty program, and global race support, Techno RC is excellence in RC. View the full lineup of Techno RC race proven vehicles by visiting www.technorc.com.
All right. So let's get into this vintage craze. Um I don't think it's a craze. It's been around for a while. I know Eric up there in the Northeast, up in
Riker,
Connecticut. Yes,
Riker. Mhm.
he has his. I used to listen to him on the Radio Impound podcast. I need to get him on her as well. I've known him for years. We've been talking about doing it. He was the kind of vintage guy that I knew. And then I found out about Dirk, I think it was last year. Sorry, Dirk. What really kind of popped for me was the vintage race at Hoosier,
Yep.
right? And I was like, I watched the documentary, I watched the Brian Dunbar documentary, and I saw that people touched on that. And then, of course, the big explosion came from the race in Vegas, which happened last year as well. But right now, I wouldn't say vintage is big. I think it's always been there. I think it's right now at the forefront of racing. Now, I've had my complaints about it because I have my vision. I don't want to see the industry squeeze it till it's dry and then we're all left with nothing. But I understand why people are excited about vintage. It's why I'm excited about gas trucks. But maybe you can talk about why vintage is blowing up. Where do you think it's going to go, and what you would like to see happen with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the vintage racing has been for a while. You mentioned Eric from the Vintage Nationals. He's celebrating his 19th year this coming September. And you have other organizations like Old School RC and of course Team Associated, the Vintage Race, and there are others that are out there. You got Iconic in Europe. You have the folks in Australia. There's quite a bit of a global vintage thing that has been around for a while, and it's undoubtedly grown. When I reflect on it, I reflect on my own. Why am I excited about vintage? And it really is because I think if you if you look at the vintage community, just like RC in general, the new community, new breeder racers may be living this 10, 15, 20 years from now. You're going to have your individuals that saw it in a magazine or in today's world online or hear you that cannot afford it. And eventually they make it to a point through their job progression or whatever that they may afford it and they're wanting to relive it, right? They saw that in the magazine, that car that they could never buy, and now this is their moment to do it. So you have those folks that are excited about the vintage racing. You have folks that had chapters like myself. You kind of ran it, you grew up on it, you kind of moved on, and now you're like, oh my God, I can relive that as well. You're also finding, those people that want to challenge, right? These cars can compete. You see some of these races, the difference in times between a modern car and a vintage car, it's not really is not that different, right? Et cetera. The cars are simpler, they're easier to tune, there's not that much tunability. They have weight in their rear end, so getting traction tends to be easier at certain conditions, right? Et cetera. So there are a lot of things that I think are creating an attraction to this vintage craze. I think there's other ancillaries that I think are, like, helping, RC and the vintage is the ONS series going outside again, right? Bringing that element as well also becomes a part of the story, of how all these things are happening, right? So there's that reliving moment. There's that I wanted to do that, but I never could. And then there is like, oh, this is just another, hobbyists, RCers, they like diversity, right? That's why we have too many classes. They want to try something new or something different. So I think there's a lot of reasons that are doing it, et cetera. It also then helps by some of the market conditions, right? Associated has been aggressive, right, and coming out with all these vehicles, and that has helped, from a parts availability, etc. And then there's a sprinkle of companies, DragonPunch, our Modern Vintage, and others that are trying to support this industry or industries. So I think there's a perfect storm that we're living right now. I'm hopeful that it's here to stay, and maybe that's a conversation we can have a few minutes as well, because I think if we're not careful, it could also hit some of the struggle elements that parts of the hobby is living every day today.
Absolutely. I've voiced those fears as well, especially after the Vegas race. I think the Vegas race was the one that kind of blew it all up. Now, I thought it was very cool. I would love to attend it. Did you go?
I could not make that race, and I'm really bummed I cannot make this race either because
Oh no.
son's going to college and I got first world problems. But anyway, so yeah, I'm a little bit sad, but we're gonna have several of our cars. We'll be announcing several of our cars that will be running out there at the event.
Okay. But that's when I kind of saw it blow right up. And I voiced these concerns because are we gonna see the industry wring this till it's dry, right? Which kind of like I want to compare it to the Slash. The Slash came into RC. It brought in it brought in a lot more. It started out as a let's have fun with a basic car, and it still is a great basic car for that. I think Spec Splash or something similar is very good for people to get in. And I'm wondering, is this gonna be like that? But then I heard somebody say something, and he was in the industry. This vintage stuff is helping pay for what's going on in the modern stuff, right? So it's like a catch 22. You need it. I appreciate that people like it and want to be a part of it. I think it's great. I mean, the vintage race look awesome. You got all the old stars out there. But in the back of my brain, I'm like, I'm waiting to see if this collapses and goes back to its roots, like Slash did.
Yeah, listen, I'm a little bit biased. I hope it doesn't go through that, but I will tell you that if we as a community, community equals companies, racers, promoters, etc., are not careful, there's nothing that would say that it doesn't go down a path that we don't want it to go, right? I mean, you alluded to it earlier, right? I mean, if vintage is helping pay the modern, that means that you've already penalized the vintage community. You're already saddling it with a responsibility, right? So we got to be careful when these saddles are created, right? So because at the end of the day, right, we don't want to be kind of a we don't want to penalize an industry that's doing well for the earnest of others, right? And I think that's a dangerous pathway. So I think that's something to be cognizant of. I think the other thing to be cognizant of, I talk a lot with folks, is rules. I think if everybody has their own approach and their rules for this, that could be what motors you allow, or that could be X parts versus Y parts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I recognize that any emerging at scale sector of the industry is going to go through these growing pains, but what people don't recognize is that we're making the average consumer l- be struggle with our own inability to come up with logical rules, right? Because if you tell one person, I'll give you the best example. For the Vegas race, you can have a 13.5 motor on your two-wheel drive car. That is the only event. I'll correct that ONS now because they have the associated rules, is a 13.5. Well, if you go to Eric's race, it's a 17.5, right? So as an example, so now you've asked the consumer to spend an extra $100 to run their same vehicle. So these are just examples that we need to go into this eyes wide open and make it as fun, as easy, as the least confusing possible for the consumer. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones supporting this growth, supporting this industry, supporting this journey. So these are just examples that I think that if we don't do this carefully, that doesn't mean that we can't be creative. That doesn't mean that we have to be like super stiff. We just have to do this eyes wide open, right? And I think that's a fear that I have And the other one is we talked about earlier, as more and more companies grow, they're gonna I'm starting to see a lot of sponsorships again. And again, why it's the fool me once, shame on me, fool me, whatever the saying is. I'm horrible at sayings, Lefty, but you know what I mean? If we're not careful, then we're gonna over-sponsor to create market share, but we're really not creating market share, we're just devaluing our product, right? Because 'Cause you're paying somebody through a discount to run your product, right? So again, if we're not careful, then we're creating the same behavior again, and then the shame on us, right? So again, I don't wanna be pessimistic, I just wanna be realistic that we have to do this. We have an opportunity to do this well, and we have an opportunity to take lessons learned and go into this in a different mindset.
Okay. So do you think right now it's a lot of no, I get it. It's nostalgia. It's cool to see your cars that you ran back in the day on the track and all that type of stuff. Do you feel because at another point, ONS is not a vintage race, it is a outdoor racing
Totally.
series, a vintage class, which happens to be the biggest class because it's very popular. Um, so my point would be, do you feel like the influx of guys like Mayfield and Rivkin, and what if we get some more pros or guys of that caliber of racing these vintage classes? Is that something you're worried about? Maybe those guys coming in and it becoming another class that they have to race at a race, and then maybe the guys that were really good at it kind of dropped on into the lower mains. Is that a fair as well? Or would you welcome that?
I personally, Jose, I welcome that. I always welcome that, right? We talked about it earlier. I went to events and I had to prove myself. And I had to prove myself by competing with people that do this literally for a living, right? So, and there may be a 1 in X chance of me winning a race or whatever, right? So they're gonna do it the much more higher probability of the time because this is what they're doing. They should be doing that. They're getting paid for it. They might as well, right? But so I personally, I'm not worried. I think people like Spencer and Ryan is an example that you mentioned. Their schedules are really packed. So we'll see how many they can do, right? Of these types of events, if it's a signature event that they go and do whatever it may be. There's other
Yeah,
people that get worried, right? And
I don't think that's gonna. I'm maybe they'll come to the ONS because they're pushing that. But I like it how it is. I mean, one of the biggest things I so Patrick explained the vintage race to me as a RC festival with a RC race, right? And I think that's a great way to explain it. Obviously we had heroes that many guys probably never got to see race, Masami, Jam and Jave, Francis, all these top guys. So I like that part of it. I just I'm worried about it being like Slash, right? And I'm also modern, right? I want to see modern progression. But I am all about I'm against Max on this one. Max is the mid motor guy, and he thinks that mid motor is faster, and he is to an extent, but has a very narrow setup point compared to the rear wheel drive. But outdoors, right now, all I want to race is gas truck and stadium truck, the old like rear motor, right? I don't want to race yeah, that. I was just look, the Associated just released the FTE. I think it's a great job. I am the guy who likes the modern stuff, what you guys are doing. What would you say to the guy who's like, "No, it has to be," because that's another big debate, and I'm sure it's gonna be a shit ton of comments in here about this because you are the modern vintage guy versus the guys who keep it original. Now, I just wanna say my piece on this. When I was at ONS, and that's my first taste of vintage, I'm sorry, guys, I haven't been to none. Man, I saw it's cool to see the cars and all that stuff, but then I saw E-clips and C-clips and this and that, and people breaking I can't remember how many parts Dirk gave away, and I'm like, "I like this, but I like that modern stuff. I want stuff that's not gonna break." But I get the purist. Do you think that's gonna eventually cause a big divide in the vintage series or vintage class?
yeah, I truly hope that it doesn't. I really hope that it doesn't, but you're absolutely right. It certainly could. And there are always going to be I think about it as a distribution. You're gonna have your extremes on both sides, right? It's like, oh my God, the purists on the vintage and oh my god, the moderns on the moderns, right? And those I hope stay as the smaller population, and you kind of have this big middle section of folks that just recognize that in the spirit of growth and in the spirit of progress, we have to make more, you know, mature choices. And the reality is that modern cars are here. The reality is that vintage cars, there's a role for them, and we want to make them as durable and as fun as whatever to race. And in order to do that, we have to embrace if it isn't a modern shock or a modern wheel or whatever it may be. Now, you can draw lines that are a little bit more elegant. I wish it was less emotional. So, for example, I think about this as like there are certain things that we should draw a line on. The best example is you should not compete a 3-gear transmission car versus a 6-gear transmission car. There's too much friction, there's too much whatever. They cannot, they're gonna struggle against each other. That's a line that we can draw because there is a physical difference in these cars, right? I just raced my car at ONS2 and won with these old traditional because I wanted to. I should have that ability to make that choice and not criticize somebody who wants to have a modern, big bore shock, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I have the same ability to put them on my car if I wanted to, right? So it's not that. So I hope that we get a little bit more of a consolidation in the middle and people are a little bit more willing to listen to a narrative. That being said, I really do hope that we simplify the rules because I think that's creating some confusion, to be honest with you, Lefty, and some anxiety and some challenges. I think that we should try to, if we're going to call it vintage, I mean, it should be spiritually a vintage car, right? I mean, we have to be careful if we start putting gull wing arms on our vintage cars. We're getting a little bit, adjustable diff heights. We're getting a little bit outside of that spirit, right? So I think there is a line that can be drawn and still preserve the spirit of both. And I think that would be healthy for both sides, by the way. Um, anyway,
I think keeping it as simple as possible is the best thing, right? I don't want adjustable diff heights and all that stuff either. I think that if I'm gonna do that, I might as well just go get a mid-motor car or whatever. I think that's a great way to put it. I want to keep it simple because I wanna just go out there and race a rear motor car. I'm not gonna lie, I am lost on all the rules, the dates, and all that stuff. Maybe for somebody that's
Are you looking to take your ride-on car to the next level? ML Toys makes it easy with plug-and-play modifications like motors, speed and brake controls, and more. ML Toys is the one-stop shop to make your ride-on car the coolest car in the neighborhood.
that's watching this and maybe wants to get into vintage, maybe break down how the classes work. Like, how does it work? Because 'Cause I'm not too familiar with it myself. I know it's my years.
yeah, historically, just very simply, and you have it's dynamic, and let's just talk about it domestic because it gets a little bit more complicated if you go to Europe and go to other places as well. That's not a criticism, that's just a reality. But if you look at domestically, historically, you had a difference between what's called a heritage class. That's usually you're in a two-wheel drive sense, the 6-gear cars. They tend to be in the 80s and the 90s, early 90s. Typically, those are 21.5 motor cars, etc. Then you have the car that I call is the bigger cars, right? Which is like in associated terms, it would be your RC10s, 3-gear stealth tranny. In the Losi, it would be the double X car tranny, and that used to be your 17.5 car. And then you have a third category, and I'm overly simplifying, which is what I call the catch-all category. Some people call it a revival. So that's your more modern, your B3s and up, or your triple X's and up. And but you have to be a rear motor. So think about them in three categories, etc. Right? And the same applies with trucks, although the earlier era doesn't really live in trucks because trucks didn't become popular to the 10T and the LXT and so forth. And then the four-wheel drive, you usually have two categories, all belt driven, some exception, but we don't want to get into those details. So you have the YZ10 91 car, and then the YZ10 95 car, and in this where you got the double X's and things of that nature, double X4s and others. And then usually these have different motors, 10.5s and 13.5. Associated now has created what is, I think, more symbolic of the 90s, which is the open class and the non-open class, which I tend to think about as simplistically like back in the day, mod and stock. You would go to an event and it was mod and stock. The challenge is that then they further divided that into now the year. So in essence, you have a three-dimensional thing, right? You got to deal with the year, you got to deal with if you're open or not open and so forth. So it's a lot to process. I'm not here to say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? My concern is that you get class dilution if you're not careful. So then you're racing three guys in one class and because you have so many different classes. So we have to be careful that we don't dilute it too much and make it overly complicated and cumbersome. So that's that's a high level view of how things go. Everybody uses modern electronics across the world. So that's a given. There's debates on shocks and things of that nature, but, that's hopefully that captures, at a high level.
So what's the difference between? Because I know I've been UK, the vintage stuff seems to be big there. So what are some of the different rule sets from Europe? Australia's doing it too. I saw they did a vintage race as well. Maybe just run us through some of the different rules between the Euro and American style of vintage racing that you know of.
Yeah, so in Europe, under the iconic rules, they just shifted this year to not be year focused, so they're not split into years. They're actually called and they have different terms for the different, platforms, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive trucks, and then they look at the cars and they actually give you a full list of the vehicles that are available for that particular category. So there's no doubt that if you're running a doesn't matter, Team Losi double X, it goes here. Very customary to Europe. They allow for bigger motors. So if you look at even traditionally when we were running mod and stock, in Europe, they only ran mod. Stock has never been a big thing in Europe. So they allow up to 10.5 motors, which we do not, and two-wheel drive vehicles, which we do not allow here in our community. So, um, so that's and our cars, as I alluded to at the beginning, are now approved for Europe, which we're really proud of because it's hard to get approval for that category. In Australia, it's even I would say they really it's and I don't wanna overstep my boundary and speak for them, but it's less about the race and more about the experience. So that means that they are actually more purist on the rules. So I don't think they allow any big bore shocks. I think in some category, they even have the original 1.7-inch wheels, so the tiny wheels that like the Tamiya Frog and those kind of cars came with. So they're even, I think, more purist in their terminology, but they are eyes wide open. They said this is more about the experience than it is the race. I think there's some events that they don't even give out trophies, right? We're there to like have a good time and race, but it is not the priority, right? So, but then they further divided it very similar to, like I said, in the US, the heritage and the middle one and the revival class. So it's a little bit differing US, Europe, and Australia. The point that I was making earlier, though, Lefty, is that in the US, we probably have, if I'm not careful, I can think of 4 different rule sets that we currently have in the US. 4.
Wow. Why so many? Is it just different factions of vintage racers? I know you have Eric, you have like ONS, you have Associated. What's the fourth one?
Old School RC is another, body,
Okay.
that has there, and then the event that you World of RC also has their Vintage Classic. They have their own subtlety changes to some of their rules, like, so for example, they use modern weight scales for vintage cars. And so they weigh your cars, as an example, which no others do. ONS does because that's part of the ONS fabric, which came from the INS. Um, but so that would I would argue that could be a fourth rule. Um, so if I could probably think of 4 plus rules sets that are out there.
Do you think you ever get together and consolidate and come up with a one standard rule base for everybody?
We're trying. It's difficult because, Eric's been doing this for 19 years. So, right.
Mhm.
So, Eric's gonna be like, "Why should I change this?" And that's not a criticism. That's just he has a great point, right? So then, Associated kind of, I think, lean mostly into the European rules, the iconic rules, and then kind of gave it some twisting of their own with help by folks like Dirk and others. So, I think there is an opportunity. I think my point, though, I would say this to you and to the community at large. I don't think if our goal is to agree 100%, that's never going to happen.
Okay.
I think we should pick like the big 5 things that we want to have common in everybody. Right. And then if somebody wants to add a little secret sauce or a little secret twist, that's fine. But I think in the interest of keeping it simpler for the consumer, i.e., motors or i.e., whatever, I think it behooves us as a community to come together and pick those 5, 6 topics that we want to agree. And we do this from the lens of the consumer, not the lens of us and whatever it may be. Because the easier we make racing, vintage or not, for everybody, you talk about this I watch a lot of your podcasts. We need to grow the industry, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a growth element that has to be recognized at scale. And that can be, attacked by economics. That could be attacked by simplicity. I love how do we make these events less long? How do we make watching these events more fun? Like, the qualifying is incredibly boring. I could talk till I'm blue in the face on all that.
I
There's a
agree
lot
with you.
that we are just stuck in the past that we're not recognizing. The modern person today, the guys that grew up on social media and iPhones and whatever, they have a patience this big. They don't wanna be at a track for 10 hours. They wanna be there, be stimulated, go, 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 let's go and get out of here, right? Um, I think if we're not careful, this is a broader statement, I think we have to address that at scale as well.
Yeah, you and Jason would have a great that was Jason, Racing Jason, who has a backyard track. This is also a discussion that we've had a lot as well. More I can't say much, but more details will be coming out later on about something that's happening. But yes, and it's true. I have a 14-year-old. I cannot get him on gaming. Can't get him away from that, right? And I understand it. I remember when I was 13, 14, if I had a dad that had RC cars and boats and all that stuff, but I didn't have gaming and I didn't have an iPhone and I didn't have internet when I was 14. So it's a different strategy. I would say that probably one of the rules you guys need to figure out is the motor rule. I'm all for keeping it as slow as possible. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think 17.5 is good, and I think 13.5 might be a little bit too much for these cars. But definitely getting on that one rule, like we need to all use these type of motors. Why do you think it's such a maybe tracks too? Because I wouldn't use a 13.5 at say Phil Hurd, but at Hoosier I would, right? Because Hoosier's a little bit more traction and whatnot. Not saying that, but I don't know. Where do you sit on this side of the fence? Do we think we should using you agree we should be using one turn motor? Everybody should be doing that, right? For
If I was king for the day,
Mhm.
I would do the 6-gear trannies at 21.5. 6-gear tranny, a lot of complexity, you don't wanna break gears, whatever it may be. These motors have a lot more torque than the old brush motors do. So I would do that at 21.5. I would do all the two-wheel drive buggy vehicles at 17.5, call it a day, and I would do stadium trucks at 13.5, call it a day. It's a heavier vehicle, that's why we had 36 turn and 27 turns back in the day, there was a reason for that. Um and then four-wheel drive, the old four-wheel drives, because of drivetrain inefficiencies and other, you get 13.5, and then more modern ones, 10.5, and call it a day. Or make them both 13.5.
Mhm.
Um, I I I don't like forcing people to change their motor in their cars when they go to one event in January and a different motor in March or whatever. Now, the promoter will say, "Well, Jose, I'm just declaring what the upper limit is. I'm not making anybody change motors, right?" So that's what a promoter would say. But take yourself out of RC and pick your motors cross, NASCAR, whatever. Do you think any one of those racers would enter a 450-minute event with a 250 motor? No, they won't. Because psychologically, they think they can't keep up. They can't whatever. So we are forcing them even though we're not forcing them. So that's what I mean.
So to counteract that argument, I had at one of the INSs, I had one of the racers come up to me and say, "Hey, do you think it's fair that I think it was short course that in short course the limit is this, and people are running less motors. He says, I think everybody should run the same motor, right? The same turn motor. So his thing was, I think people who are running the faster motors are at a disadvantage to the people who are running the slower motors. I am it's like it's like going to a INS race and then everybody is running mod to get the track time, but running their spec cars and mod. There's a few guys that are running mod as well. I think you should run a mod car in the mod car, not just but then again, that promoter can say, "Hey, I need the entries. You can run your spec car." Racer doesn't have to have another car to work on. So I see the side of both things. I definitely think you guys should come to an agreement on motor limits though. And just have that's easier to stop people from spending a bunch of money. It just tightens up the racing a little bit. And yeah, I'm in agreement with that. What are some of the other rule sets that you'd like to see change?
Yeah, and the other thing, just if I may, really quick, go to any post of a vintage event, and I guarantee you that half of the comments are like, "What are the rules?" That tell the promoters should know that that tells them we're not doing a good enough job articulating what we want to articulate. They shouldn't be worried about that. They should be worried about getting there and having a good time and enjoying their event and coming back home and going, "Wow, that was the best $2,000 I've spent." That should be the mindset of every event, right? So again, I could preach. I don't want to preach. That's just something that I think is important. Other rules that are important, I focus on just delineate the classes by what I would call our technical differences in your vehicle. I mentioned the 6-gear tranny should not be racing with the 3-gear trannies. That's a very, very simple thing for us to do. Some people would disagree with me. That's why we built a car the way that we did. People want to run big bore shocks versus old shocks. That shouldn't be a difference, in my humble opinion. There's the subtle places where it may be better than the other, but you as an individual can put the big bore shocks on anything you want. So let's not use that as a detractor of conversation, in my humble opinion. I don't want to see. I know that there's people tweaking, like putting gear diffs in vintage cars. Car didn't exist back then. You're getting a little bit. I think you're then getting a little bit with the spirit side of things, right? So keep them simple. You mentioned that earlier. Let's keep these simple. Let's keep these fun. Let's do our best in honoring what these cars were and what people like Cliff Led and Gil Losi Jr. and others decided they needed to do at that time. And let's enjoy them and let's make them strong enough so when you show up on Thursday, your weekend's not ruined and you can't race on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I think that's the balance.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Because one thing, so my ONS race, and I've raced 10 scale. There's a big push to go outdoor racing again. Then, of course, we saw at Adrenaline with the rain the days before. Shout out to the people at Adrenaline for getting that track into shape. There was always going to be a race, whether it was going to be outdoors or indoors. I found when I attended my ONS. Now I've been to quite a few 10 scale races over the last years. INS is a little different. It's carpet, it's high grip. I don't think I've had as much fun at a race than I did at ONS. And when I walked around the pits, people were smiling. I mean, even Mayfield and Rivkin were smiling, having fun, joking around. And I think if that, and I'm not just saying that's vintage. I'm just saying that was just that race, but vintage was a big part of it. And I was pitting next to a guy. He was showing me different stuff about the vintage things, and I would come over and say hello to you once in a while and look at
Mhm.
your car. I thought that was cool. I think if we get too serious and too caught up on rule sets, we do need a rule set, but we need to keep it simple, affordable for the person, and it has to be fun, right? It has to be fun. You have to enjoy these type of events because we have so many other serious events out there. It seems like the vintage side, while it's serious, you guys want to do good. It is a much more relaxed, more fun competition sort of thing for me. That's how I felt at the ONS. I don't know how it is at the other races, but everybody that I talk to just seems to have fun, and that's
Yeah. And just a couple of things that I would say Jason Rona and I had a lengthy conversation post ONS1, and And I shared with him, my reflection coming out of it because I think the vast majority of folks left the event just like you did. How much fun was that? And similar to the conversation we were just having a second ago, where I say rules are creating confusion and just look at a post, we're not doing a good job listening to the consumer. I think this is a moment where we need to listen to the consumer experience of ONS and really think about what is the fun. Is it because is vintage and modern coming together? Maybe. Is it because we're outside and outside races just tend to be more fun because you got the easy ups, you got the barbecue, you got the this, you got the that? Maybe. Is it because if we look back 10, 15 years ago, the trend of 10 scale racing being super narrowed into this pigeonhole, high traction, slicks, glued surface, pigeonholed us so much that people just wanted to breathe and have a different experience. And they were like, oh my God, this is 10 scale is kind of fun. I think Mayfield said, this is the most fun that I have had driving a 10 scale. So the consumer, the racer is giving us so much data that we need to just embrace it and reflect on it. And maybe it's time for 10 scale to change in earnest. Going back to adrenaline, Lee Setzer, Jacob, Hardison and Adrenaline did a yeoman's job to get that track ready. And I'm so thankful because I think that if it would have gone indoors, it would have been a huge detriment to ONS because people were there that if you were not at number one, people had heard how much fun number one was. And once it's indoors, it not that indoors is less fun, but you're cramped, you're like fighting, there's rain outside. The fun factor is gone. That element that I was telling you is gone. I think number two is that I think we've done a not so good of a job talking about why outdoor is different. And we've made it almost feel like is it a vintage thing? No, modern cars can race outdoors. It takes you have to take away your mindset where you go to the track and just blow it with a compressor and put it on because glued surfaces allow you to do that. You actually work on setup, right? So that's something that you have to kind of embrace. And if you embrace the challenge of setting up your car, then you go, "Oh my god, I made this change and it worked." There's a reward to that. There's a sense of ownership to that, which is kinda cool as well. There's the frustration side of that as well, right? So, I actually thought that when we set up the ONS not we, when the ONS circuit was set up, I asterisked adrenaline as almost put a Band-Aid when we didn't know that we didn't need a Band-Aid. I don't know if that makes any sense. So I think I feel like being outdoors is just like when you decide to go camping. You may go camping and you have all the right things in mind. You have your fisher and it rains and you still find a way to make it fun. We have to make sure that we think about it that way. A-scale guys, which you cover a lot, they don't go to a race and going, oh, I hope they have an indoor track next door because if it rains, it's going to be trouble. No, you go out there and you go to a race and you deal with the elements. That's part of the experience. So I'm hopeful that we preserve that, and there's a risk Mother Nature does bear her ugly head at times, but at the end of the day, it's just part of it.
I mean, you had to do it back in the day. You could
There
have
was
controlled it back in the
I
day.
went to Florida Winter Champs where we had to spend 2 days in a hotel, and then we were tractored
I remember that in the
in Tampa.
magazine. You said something, about your cars having to get qualify to participate in these events. Who do you send this stuff to, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, so if you showed our banner earlier, we've been very proud. It's not as sexy. I'd rather be designing something on a computer to work on our approvals. So we work very closely with the Iconic guys. They required a built car so they can see it, measure it, evaluate it, etc. So the Iconic went through the process and just approve us. We sent one of our cars to Eric Riker of Vonets, even though he was like super, you know, relaxed, maybe the right word. He's like, yeah, I know it'll work. I said, listen, I want you to see it. I don't want you to believe in us. I want you to see it, and we believe it'll be good. We work with Jason Rona on the ONS side. Dan worked with the folks at Associated to get it on the Associated list. So it's a little bit of labor of love, but we want that our customers have the confidence that if they buy the vehicle, they can actually go race it. So that's just part of the business. Is not as sexy as designing it or coming out with a new aluminum part, but I think it's equally as important.
Yeah, I was looking through it, and for people that have these old Losis and can't get parts, it's perfect, or modernize their cars a bit. What do you I don't know how much you can talk about this, but what is in the future for modern vintage? Anything you guys are working on currently that maybe you can shed some light on?
Well, the canned answer that every company gives you here is that we're always working on something, right? That's the kind of canned answer. And that is true. I mean, in 6 months, we've released two cars, right? I mean, I'm not trying to pat ourselves in the back, but it's been a lot of work and we're pretty proud of that. And so you're going to see, I would argue, and Dan and I, if Dan was here, would say, you're going to see at least another car from us this calendar year. Is it a low C or a non-low C? I'll leave that up to the you guys to kind of debate. But you will see a third release from us this calendar year.
Better
For
be a triple X NT, Jose, because you be racing that stuff, and I wanna race mine.
Well, you can call me offline and we can make sure you got yours ready. But you will see another vehicle from us this calendar year. We're now expanding into other platforms in terms of part support. We just released some parts for the Double X4, which is Losi's four-wheel drive car, which I think is going to be really helpful for that community. The steering system has been a challenge. So you're continuing to see other things that people don't know us for, like the gears. We talked about that. You may see a few others, things of that nature. Um, so the one thing I can crystally tell you though is you'll see another platform for us this calendar year. Um, so that is something that we are committed to and in the process of doing right now. Um, and I'll leave that at that. But we're constantly we also want people's feedback. So if people have ideas of what we should be working on, our goal is that no matter what, we're going to make it in the U.S. So it's got to be something that we think we can make at a cost and a price that you all could want to see it. Number one. And I think number two is we want to be additive, right? Just because another company's doing it, the amount of time that we spend looking at the opportunity and the need is really high. So we don't want to just do it because others are doing it and we can do it quote unquote better or in a different color. That's just not who we are.
Okay. Excellent, man, excellent. So, I just wanna confirm before I get into that question, though, I wanted to know when you do if I was to buy a double X squared kit from you, what would I need as a donor kit? And then this will lead into my next question.
Yeah. So again, there's always choices, but I'm going to make this very, very simple. In the modern terminology, you need a front clip, which is A arms, the spindles, the caster blocks. So I call that the front clip, right? And you need the rear clip, which is A arm and gearbox. Yeah, that's really, really important. And the drive shaft and the dog bones. If you wanna run vintage shocks or modern shocks, that's a choice that you have to make. The kit doesn't come with shocks. It comes with everything for you to decide what you wanna run. So I don't wanna say that you need that from the old car, but especially if you wanna run big bores, right? So the simplest way and the most accurate way is you need a front and a back clip. So if you think about it as A scale, right, the clips that come out, that is in essence what you need, right? Um, so that's the and we actually did a YouTube video, on our Modern Vintage YouTube channel that walks you through those parts that you need, specifically. Um, but that's the simplest and most accurate way to kind of articulate what you need.
Okay. I'll actually go find that video and put a link to that in the written description of this show. So, I'm gonna address this. We see Team Associated
Mm.
coming out with re-releases, like, every week, eh, and I can't fathom. I've asked you, you tell me the answer off air. I don't know if you wanna address it because you are. I can't I mean, I'm looking at TLR and I'm like, "What's going on? Can't you not see what's going on here?" And I don't know if they have the ability to do it or they can't do it. I've heard various different things about it, but I feel like we're missing out, like, on something. Not maybe not so much for you because you're doing the modern vintage stuff, but I'm sure the ability to get arms and or a re-release of a car that you can build, put it on your shelf. Why have we not seen this from Horizon? Do they have the ability to do this? Can they do it? Maybe you can shed some light on it.
Yeah. I'll start with a statement that you made to be a little bit related but unrelated. When we first met, I think you may remember that I was running TLR and you go, "Jose, why are you still running TLR? They don't even have a race team," or something like that was your thing. And I said, "We're coming back." And hopefully, my statement resonates with you because the new platforms are great, right? The 22X and the 22X4, and I've heard you comment on them. Thank you. What I haven't shared is I think you may know this. I'm also the TLR East Coast manager, so um, I'm very fortunate to represent them there as well. I can't speak on Horizon's decisions, and do they have the wherewithal to do this? Yes. I mean, of course, from a capital or from whatever, that's their choice to make. My TLR boss, Ben Ellis, who I've asked him 1,000 times, we got to get back into this game because I think there is an appetite and a need and a want to do that. I don't want to speak for them. I would say that the chances are low just because a lot of the existing infrastructure, that could be molds, that could be know-how, that could be whatever, has either doesn't exist or has been dissolved. So the capital and the time needed to do it shouldn't be minimized, and I'm not saying that you are, right? It's real, right? Especially if you're gonna do, say, the double X4 chassis, right? Incredibly complicated chassis. Still amazes me that Junior at all pulled that out when people didn't think they could pull it back in the day. But, so I think, the probability is low to none that we'll see that. Do I think it's a right decision? I can't. It's not my money, it's not my time, it's not my engineering team, that I have to take from one project and put them on another, right? I mean, that's just a reality. To be honest with you. Do I want it to happen? I will publicly say yes. Even though I have modern vintage, I would love for them to come back, because I think, it would be welcomed. So we'll see. I know I didn't I answered it as directly as I could, to be honest with you. We're gonna continue to do what we do, sorry, Dan and I, to support these platforms because we think they're great platforms, and we think people wanna relive the associated, Losi battles,
Yeah.
and we wanna help them relive it. So that's kinda what drives us every day to do what we've done so far. So we shall see. Um I've drawn up the whole car, so I joke with Ben, I said, "I got all the drawings, we can redo this," but anyway, we'll see. But I don't think so.
It's a shame. It's a shame. But I understand it. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So I think
Well
that
said.
comes down to that and the ability to recreate a lot of things. Maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of their hat and do something like this. And I just wanted to say, because I have you heard personally, and uh, I know that there's lots of people out there that run TLR that probably don't like me. That's fine. But I have gotten in my travels, I still don't agree with everything that they done. I understand it. Don't agree. But I have seen a lot of Ben Ellis and people like you. I have seen an increase in just the regular guys that are running the TLR stuff. And there's some fast guys, especially in the INS, especially in the spec class, where you see it. And even in the 8 scale side of things, we see people, lots of TLRs. Because, we have to take pictures and all that stuff. So it's like,
Sure.
oh, a TLR. And the last couple, I know at Wicked Weekend when I go here in a few weeks, it's going to be a shit ton of them. So yeah, I get it, and kudos to TLR and Horizon for sticking to their guns. On the pro side of things, I don't like it, but I have admitted a few times that I was wrong. I think the program is working. They just brought back the RPP program, which I think is excellent. I thought it was great when they first, brought it out. So I get it, I understand. I just think that I thought with all this craze and seeing their biggest competition for many years, right? It was always when you was in those magazines, it was Team Associated versus Team Losi, and then sprinkle in a Kyosho or a Yokomo. Obviously, back in the day, guys had to run Yokomos for four-wheel drive and maybe a Schumacher here and there. So it is a shame. I have a lot of triple X NT parts. I'm great. I have quite a few triple X NTs. It was my first gas truck ever. And um, I still have that truck actually. So it's interesting. I have parts. I know many people want parts out there, but I give Horizon and TLR their flowers. It's working. I'm seeing them everywhere. I've told you that personally, and I take back what I say about things like that. I can admit when I was wrong. I still don't like it, but it's working.
Yeah, and listen, this is the thing that we get the most. If I wear my manager hat, people are like, "Man, I wish we had, a big name or a big person running at events A, B, C, D, E," right? And uh, my argument to them is that the Horizon TLR is just a different business model. Right now, we've been there, right? And you mentioned the old days associated in Losi. So if we think about the industry, the racing industry as a pie, you could allocate, say, 10% back in the 90s to, say, Kyosho, Schumacher, whatever, and then Associated and Losi are fighting for that 90%. Are they 50, 40? Sometimes they were inverted, sometimes they were doing this. But the wedges were big. They had magnitude, right? They had size. Now you're that same pie, because the industry hasn't grown as much as we would like it to be, right? Because whatever reasons, is now sliced a lot more, right? By other companies, by other, I would say, other pressures, because and so forth. So I think that as Losi and Horizon had to, in my mind, embrace. I wasn't in the executive room when these decisions were being made, had to embrace that reality, right? And they had to come up with a different model that they believe worked for them and their customer base, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And that model is to focus more on a more organic team, a more regional team that we support through we still have tiered sponsorships. But you mentioned that the RPP program is I think a very interesting business model versus the contingency program, because the contingency program is really for the if you are sponsored and if you go to this event and if you do well, and if it is one of these recognized events, we shall pay you based on your finishing position. Here we're saying is, listen, if you opened your wallet as a privateer or paid some fraction as a sponsored driver and you go to this event and you do well, you're going to get something for that. We're going to pay something back to you. So, in essence, we brought in the tent of who can reap the benefits of making the decision to run a TLR car. And I think that it's 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 a good model. It's real money, $600,000. It's not chump change. Could so it's an interesting. This would be an interesting case study. Is putting 600K in that model versus 600K on 3, 4, 5, 6 big name racers. Which one yields more sales? I think the experiment. We should know what the data says in a little while from now, right?
I,
So
I
that is the
mean,
experiment at the end of the day.
I would agree with you there. I visually and going to these races, it seems to be an uptick, mostly in 10 scale. Uh, because I know Ben Ellis has really been heavy promoting the 10 scale stuff. But then, yeah, you make a good deal. You get all, and also I think the deal that the also you get paid for. It's one of the things I heard from people all the time. Oh, this doesn't give back. And there's well, if I race full scale cars, I make money back. Well, it's also a different margins, but they figured out how to do it. There are contingency programs by other people, but you have to be sponsored by them and you have to meet certain requirements. So I think the RPP program is great. I've seen the uptick in people running the cars. So for now, I think the experiment is working. And like you said, we'll see. We won't see because we don't know the numbers, but I'm sure you'll know that if it will show if it works in the end with the numbers. And you still have a new car out that are doing the new platforms for 10 scale are very good. They're doing quite well. But the racer in me is always going to say, just like you said, I need to see in the mod class, see that guy perform. And hopefully, eventually, we'll get back to that with them because for me, it's nostalgia too. AE versus Losi. And I hope we get back to that on our pro side of things because I am a big believer that we need pro RC car drivers. And I think it gives my daughter something to work towards. Just, just giving an example for these kids coming up. So all good.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think the racer in me, it's hard for me to disagree with you that I would not like to see that poster individual at times be there, right? Um, so, I think time will tell, how these models shake out, but I think what I hope people take out of this podcast with the work that you do, especially talking about all kinds of topics, is that for companies to be able to do what we as consumer want them to do, we need more participants in the hobby, right? And we just we need to raise all boats. Everybody needs to grow. The experience has to be better. The um the conditions have to be more conducive to compete with a much more complicated ecosystem from gaming to this and that and the other. So I think that, the if we continue to struggle with if the number of people doing RC is in essence stagnant, right? That race, 5,000, 10,000, pick your number, dividing the pie by more because it's easier to start up a new company. You see all these new companies coming out with 10 scales, right? We just not R1. That's just slicing the pie more and more and more if the number is stagnant. So we're going to see an erosion if we're not careful, um, because then the pies become too small and then companies disappear and then people are left with cars that they can't get parts and they get pissed off and they leave the hobby, right? So this is not about being pessimistic, but we just have to grow as an industry. And the only way to grow is by covering all the topics that you have covered. We have to make the racing experience more fun. We need to make the rules easier. We need to stop complaining about every single little thing and embrace the moment. And we need to have discussions like the ones that you're organizing here to educate and put topics on the table that may be uncomfortable or maybe fun or maybe whatever, because that's the only way that we're going to grow.
And with that, I 100% agree with you. And I believe that Horizon can be a big part of that as well. So, as well as TLR, I think we have to do it all. There's not one way, there's multiple ways. We need to be trying to do it on all of those platforms whatsoever. Jose, I knew this was going to be a good discussion because we have good discussions in person. I think what you've done with modern vintage and everything is incredible because I know how difficult it is to do these type of things and get it right on the first time, right? Fit and finish and all that type of stuff, especially as a two-man type of operation. I know all about that. And it seems to be going very good for you. I think I first heard about Christopher Kendall told me about it. He's like, yeah, I'm going to help Jose in his double X squared project. I was like, what the heck's that? Right. And he told me about it. And then obviously I've seen it. I look forward to seeing you at the ONS. We have quite a bit of gas trucks lined up there. I think people like Jimmy, who's making those Nova engines and all that stuff, the Ignite Design RC, he's one of those guys keeping gas truck alive. Getting engines was a hard thing. I look forward to seeing what Modern Vintage comes out with. I'm looking at my triple XNTs right now and saying, what can I put on them? Fingers crossed. And I'm very happy for you, man. You are filling you and Dragon Punch are providing, and all the other companies as well are providing people who probably have these old cars laying around or picked up a roller on eBay or got one in a deal. You're breathing new life into these cars and allowing people to be able to race their Losis. I call them Losi, Team Losi cars at these events. And I'm all for more outdoor racing. I am I am on. I'm not. I am all about. I like the vintage stuff. I think it's great. I think we should keep it fun, as simple as possible, so everybody keeps it like that. I don't want to see it getting too competitive. And hopefully, we can all figure out a way to use all of this Like event wise, that vintage race was appealing to me. Like the way it was set up and it looked like something professional. And I think if we can start going towards more of that and acting like it's professional, or even like okay, it wasn't professional from a professional side of things in RC, but it looked great. I think more things like that are going to happen. You brought up a lot of great topics about the outdoor racing and how much fun it is one of the reasons why I like bigger 8 scale races that may have that, like going to these races that are outdoors. Or like I will give an example, some of our races are outdoors, but under a roof, but open sides. It's just a different feeling, right? And having that at the ONS was amazing. I wish you all the best in all your projects coming up. And man, hopefully you get some redemption at ONS because I think it's like 30 gas trucks signed up.
That's what I heard. Yeah, yeah. And first and foremost, thank you for the compliment and the support. Well, Lefty, I just wanted to share, something similar to what I said to Dirk Anderson a few months ago, rather, where when I look at a lot of these events, especially on the vintage side, he's really been central to all of those. And, I think me getting to know you well over the last couple of years and know how hard you work and the kinds of commitments that you and sacrifices, I would argue, that you make and your family makes to allow you to do things like this, attend the events and so forth, make them professional and special for us as racers. So for what it's worth, I just personally wanted to say thank you for what you're doing. I know it's hard work. I know it's not as accretive as you or your family would want it to be, but hopefully keep fighting the good fight. Thank you for giving platforms for us, for companies like Dan and I's, to share our story. And I think we need more people like you doing what you do to help this industry mature and grow the way that we all want it to. But as a community, we have to understand that it's going to require all of us to really do this. So again, I just wanted to thank you because I know how hard you work and the sacrifices you and your family make to do what you do. So thank you.
No, I can't do it without you guys' support. And of course, the team, the Elite RC guys, they work hard too. They work more than me. And I enjoy it. I love RC. I love it. Probably a little bit too much. But it is what it is. And one thing I've learned that if you want to do anything successful, especially in any industry, but in this industry, your passion's got to be there. And you have to have passion because it comes times when that's all you have. So, and you just like, it's just been cool. Like the relationships that I get to meet and the people that I get to meet. And it's fun when we just have a quick conversation in Spanish and nobody else knows what we're talking about. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then they're like, people are like, what? But definitely one of the relationships that I have appreciated getting to know you. And little did I know it would lead, our conversation 3 years ago would lead to what you're doing. I think what you're doing is cool as well. And good luck with everything, man. And we'll see you at ONS. Gas trucks. It's going to be good.
Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose, for your time. If you guys wish to get any more information about Modern Vintage, can they personally reach out to you or just
Absolutely.
message?
Dan or myself, and we have hopefully plenty of vehicles of how to access us. So yeah, please, we're here to serve all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose, for your time. Good luck with everything, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Excellent.
We're just about to watch the latest No Name RC podcast. Do you know what? Good news. You can now get NNRC merch from the RC Racing TV website.
Yeah, you can get hoodies, shirts, hats, and even pint glasses.
I'll drink to that. Head over to nnrc.rcracingtv.com and get your merch today.
BeachRC.com, the racer's one-stop online hobby shop. Choose from all the popular brands and variety in stock with super fast shipping and great customer service. BeachRC.com still has the local hobby shop feel with all the benefits of the internet. BeachRC.com is the exclusive distributor for Ultimate Racing, S-Works, Pro Circuit Racing tires, Nitro Lux fuels, and Assault RC performance products. So fill up your cart and check out at BeachRC.com today.